Thank you all. I'd like to welcome you back. I hope you're all completely refreshed and ready for our keynote speaker today, Michael Comyn. Michael is the founder of the Fearless organization and has been coaching, empowering and enabling audiences to remove fear from everyday situations and generate stronger values of work-life balance by improving communications, leadership, self-promotion and personal development. In keeping with this year's theme, Embrace and Manage Change, Michael will give us an insight in how that we might improve our own personal resilience. Michael?
Thank you. Hey. Good morning, everybody, and indeed, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. It's one of those ones where, again, time-wise, I'm actually going to keep right on time today as my particular goal, seeing as lunch is the target. Don't have got us to coffee, I have to get you to lunch. I'm not sure which is the bigger ask. So, I was looking at the title of today's presentation when I sat down to do it, and this was my opening slide, Resilience in Time of Change. And then I thought, hang on a second, who am I talking to? So I changed it. Because, you know, the big challenge for us is how do we reset? How do we notice and recognize that we've gotten ourselves into a difficult place, and once we've gotten ourselves into that difficult place, how do we reset? So let's go back a bit and talk about the title, Resilience. It's the buzzword for 2013. It's on everything. The new resilient version of you. And yet, as always, there's nothing new about it. Okay, brief history of resilience. Let's go back to the end of World War II. And the American psychologists attached to the US Army, the US military, did some research on the survivors of Buchenwald, Auschwitz, and Dachau. They wanted to see, was there a particular personality trait or characteristic of people who survived, but not only survived, but thrived in challenging circumstances. The research later looked at people who had been prisoners of war in the Vietnam War. And then in the 1970s, they looked at people who had lived in the Detroit projects, the housing projects, where they'd been severely challenged. And again, they wanted to see, were there any common characteristics of the people who'd been in those situations and not only survived, but thrived. There were, and that's what we're going to look at today. And the interesting thing about it is, if I were just to generally throw it out to you, would you as a room believe that optimism ranked reasonably high in the characteristics of the resilient? Yeah? It doesn't. So there's the first thing I need to present to you. This hogwash that we're getting all the time about we need to be more optimistic. Let's be more optimistic. Ladies and gentlemen, the optimists went mad first. They were the people who sat in their cells going, today I'll get out. Today it'll be, the sun will come out tomorrow. Life is going to be fantastic. I will be okay. The resilient individuals had one specific characteristic, and it's one that we, even as a nation, need to be able to tap into. And that is the ability to test the reality of the situation you are in. Reality testing skills is the primary skill of the resilient individual. Go back to the prisoner of war camps. The resilient individuals were the one who said, okay, which is the guard I can bribe? Who's the person who's stronger than me that I need to make friends with? Who's going to keep me safe? And when you look at those characteristics, they're exactly the same characteristics we can carry into our everyday lives. It's recognizing the reality of any situation that you're particularly in, but then having a proactive response to it. So the British Psychological Society have come up with a definition of resilience for us. It is your ability to absorb high levels of disruptive change, to bounce back, and to even excel in times of change and uncertainty without acting in dysfunctional ways. Yeah? And in the room, everyone's thinking, define dysfunctional. Okay. Now, given a bit more time, I'd have asked you to do this, but I'm going to do it for you. The dysfunctional things that people get themselves involved in: endless hours of TV, withdrawing from friends and family, frenzied social life to avoid issues. Kind of like that one. Overeating or weight gain, undereating or weight loss, sleeping too much or too little, drinking too much alcohol, and lashing out. Yeah? Might be beginning to recognize yourself in there somewhere. Yeah. So here's what we've got. We've got the possibility that lack of resilience results in dysfunctional behaviors. And so far, I still haven't mentioned the S word, stress. Yeah, kilt with the stress. kilt with the busy. So let's have a look at that. There are symptoms of stress, and I'll define stress more specifically in a moment, but they're emotional. Loss of humour, irritability, resentment, bitterness, depression, apathy, feeling of fatigue, guilt and blame. Fully enough, there's something missing off that slide, which is libido, but that's for another day. Cognitive symptoms, rigidity, resistance to change, suspicion, mistrust, stereotyping of other people, objectification, distancing, I love the last one, rumination on leaving and revenge. I addressed a group of young doctors yesterday, and one of them said, when I came to this particular point, I sometimes think about all the ways I can escape from the hospital and just run across the car park and get home. And we've all done it at some point or other. One other set of them are behavioural symptoms of stress. Work avoidance, diminished personal conduct with customers and colleagues, inflexible behaviour, habitual lateness, or acting out through alcohol, drugs, affairs, and shopping. Sorry about that one. Yeah. So again, I'm hoping that everybody in the room is going tick, 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 tick. Yeah, that I'm in there somewhere. All of these, and particularly anybody in the room here who's an employer or a manager of people, they're important because they're early symptoms and we can recognize them early on in terms of what people are doing. And one of the problems we have about this resilience and stress is that once we try and intervene with it, once we try to make it better, we've got to remember that most of the time we're going to be intervening or reacting with somebody who's already dysfunctional in the way that they're approaching it. And by the way, that can include ourselves as well. There's also some physical symptoms, by the way, as well: tiredness, lethargy, sleep disorders, minor illnesses, backache, headache, etc. So, what does the resilient individual look like? If you look at this model, and in my presentation today, I'm only going to be working on one of these, we've got things like adaptability, they're innovative, they can bounce back from any given situation very, very quickly, they're quite creative, and top of the list there, ladies and gentlemen, is hardiness. It's an old-fashioned word, isn't it? It's like something somebody would describe in their garden, it's hardy. But that's the one that is under most threat for us at the moment due to work practices, due to the way we're working, due to input of so many different factors. And it's the one I want to confine to my presentation today. If I had more time with you, we would go around the rest of the circle. So here's what we're at. I'm going to suggest to you there's a resiliency toolbox. And here's the equation. It's the resiliency toolbox over the stress. Gives us the whole person. And what's in that toolbox? And there are 5 component things that you would do in order to make yourself more resilient. Top of the list is sleep. I had an opportunity recently to address the most sleep-deprived country in the world. Funny enough, by video conference and the new style of training. Where is it, anyone guess? Singapore. Second most sleep-deprived country in the world. I'm addressing it now, this moment. We are dreadful when it comes to managing our sleep, and I'll talk to you about that as we get through the presentation. Best sleepers in the world? The Dutch. There you go. If you like those kind of little facts. Anybody from the Netherlands? No? Okay. Exercise, it's the obvious one. Nutrition, meditation, not meditation. Freudian, and cognitive skills. And cognitive skills is a fancy word for happiness, which I'll cover before I finish. Okay, let's do a little bit of the biology. If you were very fancy, you could have a copy or a model of the human brain, but you always have one on you. So if you take your fists, put your thumbs in like that, bring your fingers over and put them together, that, ladies and gentlemen, is a rough Da Vinci size model of the human brain. Okay, depends on whether you have big hands or not, but anyway, you get the idea. And if we, for a moment, do some research on that brain, if we lift our fingers up, the piece here that is our thumb, that represents our thumb, is the fear center of the brain, referred to as the amygdala, or amygdala, if you need to remember how to spell it. Amygdala is Greek for almond. It's about almond-sized shape, and you'll see it as that little bean in the center of the picture there. And anytime you're feeling scared, or anytime you're feeling afraid, that's the part of the brain that kicks in. There's another one, by the way, on the right-hand side of the brain, and if you want to do this, Google or YouTube the marshmallow test. Has anyone come across it? It's where you ask kids not to eat a marshmallow as long as they possibly can. Well, until that part of the brain is developed, they'll eat the marshmallow. So that's that function. But the one we're talking about today in terms of resilience is the fear center. And it's controlled or governed by the left prefrontal cortex of the brain, that lovely piece of the front of our brain that makes us smart and makes us clever, and in fact what most people in this room get paid for using. But it's the connection between those two defines our resilience. If the left prefrontal cortex is weak, we lose resilience. If it's strong, we have lots of it. Is that a good thing or not? Let's go back a little bit and go a quick history lesson on where all of this stuff came from. Back in 1916, the US military, again, great funding, paid Dr. Walter Cannon, who was a Harvard physician, to research the idea of stress and what it was all about. Prior to that, doctors would have referred to people living on their nerves, or hysteria. And the word stress came out for the first time. And we got the famous fight or flight model. Is everyone in the room familiar with that one? You know, the idea was that 125,000 years ago, our ancestors were wandering the savannas of Africa, and a lion jumped out at them. And what did they do? They either ran away or fought the lion. Now, interestingly enough, if you go back and read Walter Cannon's book, he had two other components which have long since been forgotten because they didn't suit the teachers. Do you ever see that one happening in training? Freeze and fragment. So there are four things we do when we're under stress. We either fight, we flight, we freeze, or fragment. And here's a typical problem for you. Most of the work in psychiatry, most of the work in psychology up to this particular point, and indeed until recently, was done by white middle-class men. And there was no notion that women have a completely different response to stress. Ladies, you don't do fight or flight. According to Shelley Taylor, who's a UCLA professor, you tend and befriend. So women who are faced with stress or who are put into a situation where their resilience is tested will tend to other people around them excessively and will befriend other people to form networks and chains, which, by the way, most guys in organizations see as cliques. But that's the first insight that we have, that the historical approach that we've been taking to stress is exactly that, historical. So Walter Cannon gave us the fight or flight model. And interestingly, if you look at the word in different languages, it actually is the same word in different languages, which will tell you that it's a reasonably new word. And there's a lovely story behind this, that in fact, the guy who gave us the word stress, who was somebody called Hans Selye, his book is The Stress of Life, still sells on Amazon. He was a Canadian Institute of Stress in Toronto. He was an emigrant to Canada, and his English wasn't very good. And he said later in his autobiography that if he had better English, he wouldn't have used the word stress, he would have used the word strain. He got the words mixed up. And we would be on a strain management program, and I would be a strain management specialist, not a stress management. But the word's the word. This guy gave us a whole lot of language that doctors still use, and we talked about adrenaline and noradrenaline. His original research was trying to cure fertility problems, and he used to go through 400 rats a week in his laboratory. But he was absolutely useless at handling rats. He'd keep dropping them. They'd chase them around the laboratory. He would then inject them with various different substances and surmise from that as a result of the appearance of stress or a tumor, that it was the actual substance that he'd injected that had caused them to be ill. What was actually causing them to be ill? Yeah, chasing them around the laboratory. But anyway, to be fair to the guy, he's given us a lot of the language that we currently use about it. So, stress is very much about the human brain, and unfortunately we don't come with an owner's manual. So what do? We do our best to try and fix this. Let's go back to the lion. Do we have lions currently wandering the offices of our corporate affairs? No, we don't. Although there is, again, let's quote YouTube, it's getting quoted a lot today. Some comedian has put up a video, which if I weren't being videoed today, I would have shown you, and that is of somebody introducing lions into the office in order to increase motivation. We don't have lions today, but there's a very interesting story. Because if you go to the savannas of Africa, where the lions are chasing the zebras, there's something interesting about the zebras, or zebras. And that is that within 6 minutes of an assault that they survive, they reset. Right? Chased by a lion, get away, 6 minutes later, they're back eating grass. There's no I've been chased by a lion support group. There's no therapy. And the reason is there's no left prefrontal cortex. They don't have that part of the brain that has the one thing that makes our resilience under threat, is they don't have language. Or they don't have the language that we have, which is self-talk. And the amount of self-talk that we use is ultimately what challenges our resilience. And we're back to my original thesis on this, which is the idea of testing the reality of any given situation. That's what our stressor is now. The traffic, parking meters. And it's interesting that no zebra on earth could understand why we would use exactly the same chemical cascade as that they would use to save their lives, and we use it because we've got to do public speaking or we've got to find a parking space. And yet we do it all the time. Here are the modern ones. Technology. The average worker reckons they spend 22% of their working day wound up about something. And 1/3 of workers said technology makes their blood boil more than anything else during the working day. Yeah, I found that one specially for today. Here, ladies and gentlemen, are the top 5 triggers now. We've no lions anymore. But the top 5 reasons that our amygdala is fired off or is triggered or we're put into any kind of threatening situation are condescension and lack of respect, being treated unfairly, being unappreciated, feeling we're not listened to or heard, and being held to unrealistic deadlines. And for leaders and managers in the room here today, that's a very important consideration. And also, if you want to do a very quick summary or survey of where your stress is coming from or where the attack on your resilience is, I'm fairly confident to say to you that it will be amongst those 5 issues. Okay, so what can we do about them? Well, probably not a lot. We got the idea earlier on before, if you're feeling unappreciated, move. I kind of like that one as a stress strategy. But look at the resilience spectrum for a minute. Richard Davison in UCLA has done some great work on this, and that is the idea, are we all the same as we approach resilience? And the answer is no. Naturally resilient individuals tend to represent about 3 to 5% of the population. The rest of us have to learn how. That's the hard bit that's in here. So let's have a look at this spectrum. There are about 30 stages on it, and on this side of the spectrum here, we have individuals who are slow to recover. On this side, people who are fast to recover. On the bottom side of that, you'll find that if you put these people into a PET scan or into a scanner in a hospital, that the left prefrontal cortex, that front part of the brain here, tends to be weaker than somebody who is more resilient. That's the person on this side here who will have a stronger left prefrontal cortex. Now it's getting interesting because we're looking at what exactly is going on in the brain here that would define one person as being resilient and the other person as not. We now know it's actually down to something physical. We can measure it. And God, don't we love that? Because if you can measure it, you can manage it. That's the big phrase that we use. All right, a few problems with this. I want to stick optimum resilience somewhere in there on the scale. And I'm working in a corporate context here rather than necessarily in a personal one. But I'm suggesting to you that we need to be a little bit more to the right of center to deal with the typical stuff that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Go back to this for a second. On this side, the slow to recover people, fast to recover people, you get depression and victimhood on this side. Almost a national illness in some cases. And on this side over here, the problem is these people have a challenge to empathy. They're not very empathic. They have very, very low on compassion. They quite happily would close down 1,000 jobs tomorrow and then go off for a holiday. Would they experience stress? Funny enough, they do, but of a different kind. So we're not looking to get you to the extreme end here. That's not a good place to be. We need to get you back again into this optimum resilience space. How do we do it? Well, for the person who is slow to recover, all the texts and all the research say that we teach you mindfulness. Now, last year, as part of my own personal development, I went to the US to do a mindfulness course. Yeah. We sat and contemplated our navels. And then they brought out a tray which consisted of a single raisin for which we were supposed to take 10 minutes to eat. At that stage, I'm trying to figure out, have I enough air miles left in order to get myself home on an easier flight? I suppose I'm joking with you, but what I really wanted to do very quickly here and say is to say to you that if we go for the flaky side of the mindfulness, we're going to lose a really valuable tool. All the top medical schools, all the top universities have identified very, very clearly that mindfulness works. The challenge for us is that when we attempt to access it as trainers or as users of it, we've got to make sure we're accessing the right stuff, not the less accurately proved stuff. So mindfulness is in there. By the way, just before I finish on this, if you've got somebody who's fast to recover and you're trying to fix them, there's no data. Nobody is actually looking at how do you take the person who's overly resilient, who's fast to recover, and make them into a more functioning individual. I was talking to a colleague of mine recently who's a coach and who does a lot of work on this, and he had a client who had this particular challenge. And on my suggestion, which obviously we share some information, I suggested that he might get the client to do something that would involve empathic work. And so we settled on writing for the disabled. And the person was to go down and to assist at one of the sessions. What did this overly resilient right-hand person do with the day? They spent the entire day trying to figure out better ways that they could actually function and operate the event. So they never got into the empathic stuff that we were talking down on this side. So it's always going to be a challenge, and very few people have actually got solutions to that one yet. Here's my checklist for you. I'm going to very quickly go through this, and I want you to award yourself marks from 1 to 10 as to how well you currently cover these. Number 1, are you optimizing your health and well-being on a daily basis? Now, that doesn't mean that you've got to run a marathon every day. It means you need to get 7.5 hours of good quality sleep. It means you've got to have the correct calorific intake for the day, and you have to have 4 to 6 minutes of what we will call exercise rather than activity. Breathlessness resulting in perspiration is the actual test. By the way, if that's simply climbing the stairs, we need to talk. Have you enhanced your reality testing skills? You know, I got a lovely piece of advice from a wonderful old teacher that I had. We had him on the planet until he was 99, and I miss him dreadfully because of the most wonderful wisdom of an older man. But he always referred to something called the 18-40-60 rule. At 18, we desperately want to be liked by everyone. At 40, we begin to care less. And at 60, we realized they weren't talking about us in the first place. Now, that's a reality testing skill. And realizing, and if you talk to people who are anxious, if you talk to people who are getting themselves wound up, it's a phenomenal skill for us to reconnect with. Right down to, by the way, and I always do this with any clients that I'm coaching, as I ask you to do an entire week where you test the reality of everything that is said to you. It will make you socially unacceptable, because you won't be able to engage in gossip, you won't be able to engage in fear-mongering, and you'll have to stop listening to Liveline. Test the reality of the situation. Have you robust self-esteem, self-confidence, and self-concept? I'm going to use the word robust there on purpose. I saw a phenomenally well-educated, good presenter recently in the US. She stood up and she spoke to a conference, and she did a really good job. And as she sat down, back at the table, say, for example, at the front row, her boss put his arm over and touched her on the arm and said, "You'll do better next time." Okay? Now, he's got the issues, but she collapsed. You could see her physically go, oh. And she was wrecked, destroyed from the process. I got a chat with her outside, and I made sure I had some chat with her very, very quickly. You see what I'm talking about, robust? 3 minutes before, she had terrific self-esteem, terrific self-confidence, terrific self-concept. It wasn't robust. The robustness of it is the more important thing that you can temporarily demonstrate strength. It's the fact that it doesn't give in or doesn't succumb to the first assault that's with it. Self-esteem, it's easier to say what it's not. Just watch it reality TV and you'll get the idea there. Self-confidence is how we physically present ourselves. And self-concept is the idea that, yes, you do actually make an impact on the people around you. Have you developed and applied deliberate personal resiliency skills? Again, score yourself from 1 to 10 here. Are you doing something every day to keep this mortal coil that we have functioning to its best ability? Whether it's exercise, meditation, prayer, relaxation, it doesn't matter. As long as there's something that you're doing so that you're not simply surviving, but actually thriving, which is the word I want to look for. And my last list is something I have a personal goal for, and that is serendipity, spontaneity, and serenity. What is serendipity? Happy chance, yeah. To me, it's about being open to a situation, and I had a lovely example of this recently. Coming back from Seattle, I'd done the trip last year 14 times, I know. So I got an upgrade, and I was in business class, and I was really delighted with myself. And as I sat into the seat, the next traveller who was going with me came up to my seat and put his stuff in the overhead locker, and he said, "By the way, I won't be talking to you for the duration of this flight." And I thank Oscar Wilde and all of the other witty Irishmen ahead of me, because I turned to him and said, "Don't worry, I've made the same decision about you." At which point, he spent the rest of the flight talking to me. The serendipity is, I'm presenting to his company later in the year. So serendipity for me is, and I'll use the IT analogy, it's about staying online in any given situation to get the best from that situation. And the minute somebody else puts you offline, you've lost the serendipity. How come some people are more open to situations than others? And that's in many cases because they're able to stay online. To me, the resilient individual doesn't get their system put offline by what's happening around them. Spontaneity, absolutely, you've got to do something about that. True story, coached somebody recently, said to him, "Look, between now and the next time we meet, I'd like you to do something spontaneous." Checked his iPhone, he said, "Well, I can do something next Thursday at 3:30. A real story. Spontaneity has to be ecological. Obviously, you can't go home some evening and say to the other half, "By the way, I'm off around the world for 3 years, I'll see you later." It has to have an element of ecology to it. And serenity. The single most valuable diagnostic tool for me in terms of your stress levels is your ability to tolerate silence. There you go. If you can't tolerate silence, there's something we have to fix. So it's putting the silence back into it. How many radios are on? How many TVs are on? In fact, some people who are frightened to death of silence because they'll hear themselves. So there's our toolkit: sleep, exercise, nutrition, meditation, and cognitive skills. Something else I want to throw into this one. There was a story recently in the papers about Ryanair airplanes having to declare emergencies because they were short of fuel. And it was a total rubbish story. In fact, it's simply a practical thing. And that is that all aircraft must land every flight, regardless of where they're coming from or to, with 30 minutes of fuel on board. And the moment that is not likely, they declare an emergency and they're given priority. And that's how it works. My question to you is, are you working on your endurance or on your reserve? And I meet more and more people every day in the working world who are now on the reserve and have long ago lost the endurance. That physical reserve must not be touched. You need to land your aircraft every night when you get home with 30 minutes of fuel on board, if not more. And it's a really bad habit we've picked up recently, where we've started to cut into that reserve more and more and more. And the more we do, the more likely we are to suffer the consequences of it, which will represent itself in many cases as illness. So what can we do about it? Well, if you see the battery charged to the other extreme, you'll see that all of the other things are back in place again. The physical exercise and activity, the emotional intelligence, which you talked about in terms of resilience and reality testing, and cognitive ability, which is the ability to be able to be wise. It's an awfully old-fashioned word. But we've lost it. We need to get it back again. Can we bring back some wisdom? Never mind knowledge. What about wisdom? Okay, I'm going to take you on a very quick exercise on the history of sleep. And I think this is so important that I want to actually cover this as part of my key presentation to you today. Go back prior to 1859, and our ancestors slept twice a night. We had something called segmented sleep. We were in bed at 8 o'clock. We slept through until about 1 o'clock in the morning, at which point we got up, tended the fires, checked the animals, visited neighbours. We did a variety of different things. And then we went back to bed again. And we slept through until about 6 o'clock in the morning, and we woke refreshed and ready for the day. So what happened in 1859? Industrial Revolution. Trends, yeah, artificial light. All of those things happened, and the middle classes arrived, and it was no longer acceptable to be awake in the middle of the night. It wasn't the done thing. If you go back to the old textbooks, that first sleep was referred to in French as the beauty sleep. You've heard that one before. And the first gap in the sleep was the first watch, and that's where we got the phrase night watchman. And if you look at even some, for example, of, go down to Glenstone Abbey and the monks will pray during the night. They will wake during some of those patterns. In the Muslim faith, there's an optional middle of the night prayer as well. And so the idea was that we segmented and we broke our sleep. And what's really interesting, because I was presenting recently to retired individuals, and a lot of people, once they hit retirement, return to this segmented sleep and are terribly anxious by the fact that they wake during the night. The trick is to lose the anxiety about it. Okay, let's go back. Post-1859, where are we at? We had this non-segmented sleep. So we sleep from about 10:30 till about 6 in the morning. And the interesting thing about this is your granny was absolutely right. What did granny say about the hour before midnight? Worth 2 after, exactly. And that's because around the early part of the morning, we're going to get a burst of the stress hormone, which is called cortisol, and that wakes us up. And the sad news, ladies and gentlemen, is that most of the sleep that you have post that event is only treat sleep. It has no value whatsoever. I know. I delivered that to a group of people yesterday. They went, "What do you mean? You mean I can't stay in bed till 10 in the morning on a Saturday?" You certainly can, but it's a treat, and it's not doing you any good. 10:30, fast asleep, really good sleep. Most of that early part of the sleep will be restorative. Now let's roll forward to where we are now. Part of my work in the last 2 years, I've got to work with IT engineers particularly, and programmers, and here's the sleep pattern we're looking at. And so you've got this 1 o'clock sleep. The cortisol awakening response, which happens anyway at this part of the morning, is going to happen 1 hour before you're due to wake, and it's double if you're not looking forward to the day ahead. How many people in this room here wake before the alarm? Yeah, you've all got good sleep patterns. Anybody here press the snooze button? You've got rotten sleep patterns. Yeah. So really what I'm going to suggest here is that part of our resilience, and I can only in the time I have with you today tease you to suggest to you that if you get this right, the results are phenomenal in terms of productivity, decision making, your ability to get things done. Let's talk a little bit about caffeine. I always thought it's kind of interesting that I was offered coffee 6 times during the coffee break today, and I didn't take any. I suppose I better practice what I preach. I have 1 cup of coffee a week on a Sunday, and I absolutely adore it. Here's the effects of caffeine. If you have no caffeine in your system, you're going to get 107 minutes of what's called REM sleep during the night. REM sleep is rapid eye movement. It's the sleep that is good for defragmenting your hard drive. I might as well stick with the IT analogies till someone stops me. And it's when the brain resets itself. If you've got 3 cups of coffee on board throughout the course of the day, you only get 66 minutes of it. So even just from the caffeine intake, that, the things that we do in our lifestyle, I'm not as worried about the quantity of sleep you're getting. I'm more interested in the quality of sleep you're getting. My work at the moment involving the airline industry is looking at how well rested pilots are. You'll be glad to hear that they are generally very well rested. But as I said, recently speaking to a young doctor who hadn't slept for 36 hours, and in order to drive herself home from work, she deliberately trapped her hair in the sunroof of the car so that if she fell asleep, she would fall forward and wake herself. Another trick the doctors do is they break a capsule of ammonia in front of their nose, and if their head falls down while they're driving, it'll wake them. That's a problem for another day that has to be fixed. But look into our own IT industry, and you will also see some very poor practices in relation to fatigue and the errors that we make. That's the mixture of sleep that you're going to get across the ages. In your 20s, you're going to get about 96 minutes of REM sleep. You'll get deep sleep, which is the restorative, physically restorative, makes you less tired and less fatigued, for about 83 minutes. And then you're awake for about 16 minutes during the night. You just don't remember the waking moments. You do a little vigilance check. And if you're sleeping in a hotel room that you're not used to, you do double the amount, but you don't remember them. So you're just bringing yourself up out of the sleep, checking everything's okay, and going back down to sleep again. By the time we get to our 50s, look at that mix. We're right down in terms of all of them, and we're awake for about 38 minutes during the night. That's going to happen anyway, no matter how good you are. But it becomes really important in terms of managing our resilience that we restore some form of discipline around the rest area. And let's see if we can stop it. Now, I know I may be preaching to the converted. There may be some people in the room here today who are really good at this. You'll spot them, by the way, because they're the ones that are wide awake, not yawning, and in good form. Okay. You can monitor your own sleep, by the way. It's become highly intriguing these days with the apps that are available. You can get little ones that go to your iPhone and your Android phone in various different ways, and they'll tell you exactly what it is you're doing. Beloved of the hypochondriacs of the world, they're there to be enjoyed. Okay. So let me take this to the next step. All I wanted to cover in that one was the idea of getting our sleep right. Now let's show you what happens if we don't. If we're not managing that aspect of our resilience really well, you'll see the categories over my shoulder here start to appear. Number one, you'll be more prone to catastrophic thinking. Catastrophic thinking is where you start to run scenarios of how awful things can be. One of the things that I do as a hobby and I thoroughly enjoy is we run a fear of flying program. We've one tomorrow, for example, and on that program people will share stories with me about how before they go on an aeroplane they check the house to make sure that after the plane has crashed, that when people come into the house that they'll be able to find things. Or they store text messages in their phone that they will send as the plane is crashing. I know, you go, oh my God, I'm not that bad. But that's catastrophic thinking nicely illustrated. Ladies and gentlemen, we do it all the time. But it's incredibly destructive, but we do it more if our resilience is challenged. If that left prefrontal cortex connection to the amygdala is weak by lack of sleep, lack of exercise, poor nutrition, no meditation, and poor cognitive skills, we start to do these things. So here's my case that I'm building. Probability overestimation. We start to overestimate the possibility of something happening, and not in a good way. Everything becomes black and white in how we see the world. We have an intolerance of uncertainty. We have an increased level of need for control, and we start mind reading. See the distance again between that and the reality testing. So we're there in a meeting and we're speculating on what's happening. And the last thing we'll actually do is find out what exactly is happening. Lovely experience of that recently. Somebody came up to me and said, I hear John is not too happy with you. I went, oh? Yeah, very, very annoyed about something. So I picked up my phone and I rang the guy in front of the other person. No, stop. I was only taking a rise out of you. You know? Test the reality before you engage, and your resilience will follow. Let's look at the 4 kinds of fear that present themselves to us on a day-to-day basis. The snake, is that a useful fear? Yeah? Okay. Well, I'm going to put up as a real fear. We'll describe, is it a useful fear? I don't know. St. Patrick next weekend supposedly got rid of all the snakes. Not the ones in the government, but the rest. Got that one there. That one in there. How many people died of snake bite? Or when was an easier way to say it? When was the last person somebody died of a snake bite in Australia? 1985. Yeah. Because they're completely aware. If you ask anybody who lives there what to do, they know what to do. A friend of mine went down to Australia, wouldn't shower for 3 days because of huntsman spiders. You know, hey, see, you're in that one there as well. But it's a real fear, and we're born with 4 fears. Mother Nature gives us 4 fears when we're born. A fear of heights, a fear of loud noises, a fear of strangers, and a fear of anything that moves reasonably quickly. Around 18 months of age, those 4 fears are suspended. Any parents of toddlers in the room? What happens to the fear of heights? Child's up on the roof. Fear of strangers. What do we have to tell them all the time? Don't talk to them. Fear of anything that slithers. They'll bring you worms in from the garden. Look what I have for you. Yeah, exactly. And fear of things that they're not expecting. Yeah, they'll eat anything they possibly can. Put the airplane up there. I'm going to put that up as an irrational fear. You know, if you want to try and die in a plane crash, you're trying to join a very exclusive club. And primarily, that's why we're going to call it an irrational fear. The most dangerous part of any flight is the road to the airport. Yeah, you've heard all of those bits and pieces. The mouse, or the rat, I'll put it down as a borrowed anxiety. And I have a genuine concern about this one, is the extent to which we trade on this as human beings. You know, I'm part of a residents association where I live. I got a tweet sent to me, more break-ins in the area. There have been 6 this week. Yeah, I do my reality testing skill. I ring the local Garda station. They said, no, there was 1 last night. What do we seem to do as human beings? We need to find the data, and like the little meerkats that you see, you know, looking around, as soon as an alarm goes off, we need to spread it as quickly as we possibly can. I think you've heard my point on that one fairly well. And the picture of the of the alien, fears of the unknown. Again, finding out helps to manage that. So let's see what we can do about that one. Be very, very careful where you're getting your anxieties from, and check them. It's interesting. I had a great opportunity to hear Captain Sullenberg talking. Who is he? The captain of the Hudson, yeah. You know, there's an amazing story about that in terms of it, is that everybody on that aircraft in an actual emergency performed really well. You know, they all got out onto the wing. Only 14 people wore life jackets that day. 1 man wore 2. And 1 fellow went back in to get his BlackBerry. I just think that's a cool story, that in the middle of this emergency, what are we like as human beings when an emergency happens? We're fantastic, for the most part, if we're resilient, by the way. Okay, let me use a computer analogy. I've already suggested to you about the hardware. To me, the hardware is looked after by our nutrition, sleep, exercise, fitness, and breathing. The software is our education, training, habits, practices, and experiences. The operating system, are you a Mac or a PC? Look what I'm using. Yeah. And what I want you to do is maintain your hardware, eat well, sleep, exercise. Maintain your software. Be careful what you download from others. Yeah? And watch for the viruses. And upgrade your operating system and deal with facts, not speculation. Here's a resilience contract that you can take part in. Make connections with other people. Avoid seeing crises as insurmountable problems. Accept that change is part of living. Move towards your goals. Eat more ice cream. Take decisive actions. Look for opportunities for self-discovery. Nurture a positive view of yourself because no one else is going to do it. And keep things in perspective and maintain a hopeful outlook and take care of yourself. There's a couple of texts which I'm going to leave up just for a few minutes while we take some questions that I would recommend if you're interested in it. And I'll make this list and the slides available to you, obviously, for download later. There's some really good subjects on it. One of my favorites is Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And for any of you in the corporate world, Immunity to Change by Robert Keegan is a really good text as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I have 5 minutes left for questions, but thank you very much indeed. I hope I've got you thinking.